Today's webinar is actually going to be presented by Louise Sanders, who's our Head of Development and Scheme Integrity at UKAS. Louise has been with us for several years and she's very well placed to provide an overview that we're getting this morning and also to address those questions at the end. So with that in mind, I'll hand you over to Louise.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much, Laura, and welcome to everybody on today's webinar. So we're going to talk about the journey to accreditation, as Laura has already said, and this webinar aims to provide further information for organisations that may be considering embarking on their accreditation journey. So as Laura's already said, my name is Louise Sanders. I've been with UKAS now nearly, just over 19 years. So I started off as an assessment manager before working my way into development and now leading that team. So my team are really lucky in that we work with new organisations, with government, with regulators and industry to develop accreditation in areas where it's not yet present. We also look after the scheme integrity function within UKAS, so ensuring that schemes used for accreditation purposes are fit for purpose. So throughout this session, we'll have the Q&A function open. So as always said, please do use that for any comments or any questions. We'll have some time for questions at the end of the session. If we're unable to answer your question immediately, then we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Okay, so off we go. So this webinar is part of a series that we repeat regularly throughout the year. The first one of the series ran last week, and that webinar was aimed to introduce the concept and value of accreditation. The third session will run next week, and that goes into more detail about the role played by the UKAS assessment managers themselves, the people who are your point of call at UKAS, the people that you get to know very, very well as you move through accreditation and then maintain your accreditation as well. But in today's webinar, we're going to look at the information and resources that UKAS can give you as you start to work your way through the accreditation process. And once you've determined that actually accreditation is the right for you, for your organisation and your sector. So we'll start off there. So what is accreditation in terms of, is it right for you? Are you ready to proceed with the accreditation process? And if you are, how do you begin to apply? We'll talk about the pre-assessment process, the initial assessment, and the whole assessment approach as well. We'll talk about what happens if we find any weaknesses or any gaps in your processes and where we need to raise what we call findings, non-conformances. We'll also talk about how you maintain your accreditation. We'll also talk about the big topic of how much it costs. And then, of course, what happens next? What are the next processes, the next steps, and how can we help you with that process? So, before you apply, it's important to consider whether accreditation is the correct course of action for your business in your sector. It's worth recapping on the benefits that accreditation can provide here. So these include highlighting gaps or weaknesses in operational capability and providing an opportunity for improved organisational efficiency and outputs. Accreditation also provides independence assurance of technical competence and can set you apart from your competition. The assessment process that accompanies accreditation can also help to assess, identify and reduce any risks that might be present. The global recognition provided by accreditation increases international acceptance for imports and exports. And because of the mutual recognition arrangement through the likes of IAF, of ILAC and the EA and UKAS and our accreditation, it means that it can aid the removal of technical barriers to international trade as your accreditation is recognised globally. Accreditation provides or creates confidence in industry supply chains, and it's often specified by public and the private sector organisations as a prerequisite for acceptance. Examples of mandatory accreditation for activities include forensic services in the UK. So many of these need to be accredited for either 17020, which is a standard for inspection bodies, or for 17025, which is a standard for testing laboratories, or indeed both, depending on the intended activities, as well as being reviewed against the Forensic Science Regulated Statutory Code of Practice. And we've also got asbestos. So the Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012 states that there is a need for organisations to be accredited against 17025 and reviewed against an approved code of practice and guidance. Screening services for healthcare, such as infectious diseases in pregnancy, must also be accredited as part of those governance requirements. So accreditation provides confidence to employees that they're doing the right thing, to customers that they're buying what they think they're buying, and to stakeholders of the commitment to quality and service improvement and validity of the activities that they are interested in. Accreditation supports the generation of new business, potentially providing expanded access to new markets and regions. UKAS survey our customers each year to gain a better understanding of how the commercial benefits of accreditation are perceived, and the stats on the right-hand side of this slide feature the results from this year's survey. So you can see that there's a good positive reaction there to the benefits of accreditation. UKAS provides accreditation for organisations providing a range of services, as illustrated on this slide. It's important to establish whether accreditation is applicable to your business and the sector that you operate within. UKAS accreditation is granted to organisations that have demonstrated that they fully meet the requirements of relevant national and international conformity assessment standards. So if you're a testing, a calibration or a medical laboratory, or you provide certification or inspection or validation and verification services, then accreditation is likely to be very relevant to you. Accreditation is also applicable to a number of healthcare areas, such as physiological and imaging services, to medical physics and clinical engineering, biobanking, and proficiency testing. And finally, accreditation is applicable to producers of reference materials in a number of different sectors across the board. One of the first things you'll need to do when you've decided to take the first step on your journey to accreditation is to purchase the standard that's relevant to your activity. Now, standards may be purchased from either the BSI website or from ISO directly, but some of the healthcare standards, such as the IQIPS standard, are freely available, and you can download them either from the IQIPS website or indeed from our website as well. So, accreditation is granted against a specific standard. A conformity assessment body can be accredited to a number of different standards, depending on their activities and how they vary across the board. Standards are formulated by groups of experts. There are British standards, European standards, and globally recognised standards as well. Standards outline the requirements that must be met by organisations for them to succeed and deliver their services safely and effectively. Standards define best practice in many different areas and come in a number of different formats. During these early stages, UKAS will work with you to establish if your business is ready for accreditation, and if not, what the options are that are available to help you along the process and for you to prepare to get your organisation ready for that process as well. UKAS provides you with various resource materials to determine whether your business is ready to apply for accreditation. Before you begin your journey, there are a few things that we recommend that you do. Now, these include making sure that you're really familiar with the standard that you would like to be accredited against, and that you are meeting the requirements that are set within that standard. Equally, making sure you're familiar with any of the supporting publications associated with that standards. So one of the things you can do is to ensure this is to subscribe to our monthly publications newsletter. So this provides essential information about new publications, withdrawn or updated publications, and documents that are inviting consultation. So to get involved with that is a really good idea, so you know what's coming and what the direction of travel is for those sorts of documentation. We also have a number of readiness assessment tools. So we've got one, the first one was one for 17025, so for testing laboratories. They're free online tools available from our website. They now cover a number of different standards, so not just 17025, and these are being constantly evolved and added to. So if your standard isn't there yet, then please keep an eye on it, because it's likely that it will be developed shortly. They're free online tools available on the UKAS website. They'll help testing or calibration laboratories and other areas as well as you move towards either certification or inspection, for example, and they'll help you to identify any gaps in the requirements of the standard and their current operating status. As I've said, we're now issuing further readiness tools for other standards and other activities, so please do keep an eye on that page. The UKAS Training Academy also offers a range of courses relevant to all accreditation standards in order to help organisations prepare for accreditation assessment, and also to help them enhance their knowledge of the standard for quality professionals in all sectors. A full list of available training courses, including in-person, virtual, on-site, which could be delivered in your own services, in your own premises, sorry, and all of our e-learning options are available on the UKAS website. Moving on, talking more a little bit about publications. So to help you in your journey, you should identify the relevant supporting UKAS publications, which will be required for you to comply with for you to gain accreditation. International publications relevant to your area of accreditation are also available. They might be on the EA website, the IAF or the ILAC website. Supporting publications and technical content can be found on the UKAS website. That might also include technical bulletins, news articles or updates for the entire sector. You can sign up to receive monthly updates, so you don't have to remember to come and check it. We can let you know each month what's happened. So those monthly publications updates also include information on various standards that might be out for consultation as well, or that might have been withdrawn or updated. So talking a little bit more about that readiness assessment tool, we're going to focus on the 17025 one here. UKAS has developed a self-assessment tool to help your organisation to decide whether accreditation is right for it. And as we've said, currently available for 17025 and others. You can access these tools via the UKAS website under Readiness Assessment Tools. And the tool for 17025 focuses on the main themes of 17025. And there's many smaller points and specifics that we can't cover, but it gives you a good overall feel for the standard and your understanding of it and how ready you are. There are a number of questions that we will ask you, and if the answer is yes to most of those questions, then your organisation is likely to be ready to apply for accreditation. To support our accreditation work, we offer public and on-site training courses, as well as providing international advisory services. While training is not a mandatory requirement for gaining accreditation, it can be useful in enhancing the knowledge or the awareness of some of the more complex areas of the standards. or providing you with tools and techniques to fill in the remaining gaps that may be there and ensure your systems and processes are developed in line with the requirements for accreditation. Our portfolio of courses provides UK and overseas delegates with knowledge and best practice of accreditation practices and conformity assessment systems. Our expert trainers are committed to providing you with knowledge and the skills to add value to your organisation and confidence to your customers. All of the UKAS Academy trainers are current or previous senior assessment managers. So there is also an opportunity to ask an AM specific questions in relation to the standard, not just about your organisation. Training is available in a number of different formats, as we've said, including in-person or on-site at your own premises, or virtually through an online platform that we have, or via e-learning modules, which can also be found on our website. I would point out as well that for the in-person ones or the virtual training courses, the knowledge you get from listening to other people, from the other delegates, is absolutely priceless. So it's really good when we're delivering those courses to see how different delegates are asking questions and actually getting help and advice from other areas. And I think that confidence that it gives you that you're not on your own, that other people are going through the same process, is really helpful and really helpful for everybody involved. So in the next section, we're going to explore how you apply for accreditation, having decided that it is ready for you, right for you, and you are ready actually to move towards it. So this slide, lots of green boxes here. This slide describes the application process itself. So you need to complete the correct application form. This will include details of what to submit, including key policy and procedure documents, proof of legal status, and this will all help to ensure swift processing as we deal with your application. So supporting materials include the relevant application form. Now these are called AC forms, and you'll find these on our website, and they're specific to the different areas. So whether you're looking for applying to be an inspection body, certification body, medical laboratory, testing laboratory, whatever that looks like, there are a number, I think that we're up to 11 or 12 different application forms now. So find the one that's relevant to yourself and get that completed. You'll need to send in some management system documentation. So might be a quality manual or your quality policies, whatever that looks like. We'll need to see evidence of your legal status, so who you are and who it is that we will be accrediting. We'll need to have a signed copy of the UKAS agreement, and there will need to be a payment of the application fee as well. Now, if you're based outside the UK, please do continue to apply for accreditation. Perfectly, very welcome to do so. But please contact our sales department. So that's sales@ukas.com in the first instance, and they'll help you in submitting any of the documentation that you need to. So we'll look after you in that way. The application is then reviewed. So we make sure that we have the facilities to be able to look after you, to be able to assess your scope. So we'll need to make sure that we have our own policies and procedures that cover your activity. We need to make sure we have competence in our own staff, that they're expert, or we'll need to source experts to make sure that we can assess you robustly, fully. And we'll need to make sure that we've got availability of staff to make sure that we can meet any of your timeframes, to make sure that you meet your needs for any tenders or contracts, etc., that you may be having. The review will also include as we've said, talking about timely manner, very, very important. And if there is a need for you to be accredited or to have an assessment by a certain date, please do let us know right from the beginning so that we can factor that in when we're planning our assessments and scheduling those with our teams as well. And if that doesn't happen, then we'll let you know, and we're not able to meet your requirements in terms of time, then we would let you know as soon as very possible so that we can discuss it and work out what we should do in that circumstance. Moving on to the pre-assessment, we're now just going to explore what that looks like and how that works. So moving on. Pre-assessment is really, really valuable. It's not a mandatory part of the assessment process, but we highly, highly recommend it. And we know from it, from case studies that we've done, that it does help smooth the process through the accreditation process by having it. So absolutely not mandatory, but we do really recommend it for you. The pre-assessment allows you to meet your lead assessor or your assessment manager. It enables everyone to get to know everybody. So we get to know your teams. You can get to know us, and we can understand your operations and how you work and what your needs are in terms of accreditation as well. It means that you can ask questions relating to the initial assessment. They're usually around, are we ready for an initial assessment? When can you come back and do this? And it provides an impartial external perspective on your processes and your procedures, and helps to identify any possible areas for non-conformities or weaknesses or gaps that haven't yet been filled. We do, of course, record all that into an assessment report for you, so you have a record of what we've looked at, what we've discussed, and then you can work on that. So any weaknesses and of course strengths are highlighted, so you know where the status then of your organisation. It is an informal assessment, so it's a nice way to get to know everybody, for us to get to know you, as I've said, and you to get to know us, but for you also to ask questions. We haven't got our full assessment hats on at that point, so we are able to discuss ways that you might be creating procedures and policies. We might be able to discuss those with you in a more open, frank way. We recognise and we find lots of things on our pre-assessments, but these are just some of the common areas that we just commonly find all the time. So a lot of the time there's a misunderstanding of some of the requirements within the standard, or if it's a sector scheme and certification. So sometimes that's that people think there's much more involved than needs to be, or they've gone off on a tangent and want to develop something that's really not needed, or perhaps they haven't understood the gravity or the complexity of a certain sentence that can often be far more complicated than it might appear on first look. So that's very common. That's something we would focus on, just to make sure that the key areas are really understood, and that nobody's going off on tangents and doing things that they don't need to do. There are often normative standards or requirements listed within the standards, and sometimes these are missed and people don't realise that they need to meet those requirements as well. Or they might have been indirectly or incorrectly determined by the organisation when they've applied, so they might be looking at the wrong normative requirements. We mentioned those international mandatory documents, so whether it's IAF, ILAC or EA, sometimes those are missed and people don't realise that they are mandatory documents, and you do need to be aware of them and meet those requirements as well. Classic one is the lack of implementation of processes and policies, and it's kind of a given that that's going to be the case, to be perfectly honest, on a pre-assessment. You've written your quality manual, you've written your policies and procedures, and you're getting them implemented, but there's going to be some that are still in the box and that haven't been run in normal daily life yet. That's perfectly normal, and we would discuss that with you in terms of how are you going to implement them, what's the time frame for that, and how are you training people, how are you making people aware of that. Another classic one is that the practice that we see, if we're in your laboratory, or if we're watching a witnessed assessment or discussing the activities that you actually perform, it might well be that the practice is slightly different to the documented policy or procedure. Generally, it's a positive thing, in fact, in that what's happening is usually far better or more complex or more thorough than perhaps is alluded to in the policy or procedure. So they need to tally clearly. So we would have those discussions with you to make sure that one reflects the other well. And then another one, very classic as well, is that you're doing the right thing. And there's some great practices we've seen. It's just not yet quite been documented in a policy or a procedure. So sometimes having those fresh eyes from your assessment team to notice these things for you is really helpful in seeing the wood for the trees and helping you to identify where the gaps are and what needs doing next as well. Conformity assessment standards. So all of these will follow the same general structure. Once you've seen one, you'll recognise, if you like reading standards, I guess, but you'll recognise the same structure across all of them. So there'll be general requirements. So what you need to be, what you need to have, things like that. So legal entity, you need to be legally responsible for the work that you're doing. Structural requirements include what you need to be. So you need to have a structure, you need to have all of those different things in terms of staff and that sort of thing. Resources, what you need to have, equipment, staffing and all that sort of thing. And processes, what you need to do. And then finally, there are always requirements for your management system, sometimes called a quality management system, sometimes called a management system. And that's how you govern your own activities, how you know that you evaluate your own processes to make sure that it's fit for purpose for yourself and that it meets the requirements of the standards as well. So those management systems will include document control, records control, your internal audits. I know everybody's favourite subject. Any complaints or non-conforming work, for example, management review. So that review that happens perhaps annually, perhaps slightly differently, depending on which standard, to where you review your own processes and saying, how are we getting on? Do we meet our customers' needs? And is everything going okay? So fairly standard in terms of management system. Once you've read one, then they're fairly similar across all of the standards, but obviously structural, resource and process requirements do differ depending on the activity that it's being covered. So now we're going to move on to the initial assessment and talk about what happens and what takes place on that initial assessment. So just whizzing through this slide for you just to give you a feeling of what that happens. We always have an opening meeting. Now this means that we'll get together with yourselves, as many of your staff as you would like to attend, just to outline what we're there for, the timings of the assessment, the order of the assessment in some parts, if we need to see certain things early because somebody only works half a day or whatever that means, we need to make sure that that's all understood and clarified at that opening meeting so that we all know what's going to happen. We might also agree at that point who it would be if we do raise any improvement actions, who within the organisation should be approving those. Shall we approve them as we go along, which is the normal process, or are they reviewed perhaps at lunchtime and perhaps in the evening and agreed with senior staff then? It's completely up to you, but we would get that understanding record and understanding and agreement at that opening meeting there. So the assessment itself will involve detailed reviews of records. We're going to look at your policies and your procedures, records of activities. We're going to look at who's done those activities. So we're going to look at their competence records. We're going to look at equipment records if that's relevant. We're going to look at customer records in terms of what they've asked for and what you've given them and how you've processed those records to ensure that you meet your customers' requirements. We do tend to interview people, not a formal interview, you know, somebody sat the other side of the table from you, but we will have chats with lots of your staff to understand what's happening, to ask those questions, as well as witnessing all the key activities. So whether that's in a laboratory, we're looking at tests that are being performed, or whether we're seeing a certification activity and we're actually witnessing you perform a certification audit. So whatever that looks like, we will need to do that. We always try to vary the way that we assess. So we might assess vertically or horizontally, or a mixture of the both. So vertically is when we might take, say, a sample report and then go back and go step by step right the way through the activities of that sample, what it's done, how it was booked in, how it was processed, how it was prepared, which analysis took place, which staff did that, where their competency records are, what equipment was done, when the procedure was last reviewed, all of that kind of thing. Or we may look horizontally, so we might look at all of the document controlled across all of the activities and all of the organisation. So it does depend. We look at different things in different ways. Vertical assessment helps us to see that all of the systems link together. And then horizontal assessment gives us a good idea of implementation of a quality management system. We'll always debrief at the end of the assessment. We'll always give you that feedback and discuss our findings with you at the closing meeting. And we will give you a recommendation on the next step. So hopefully that would be that we recommend we can accredit your organisation, or maintain accreditation, or extend your accreditation, renew your accreditation, and we'll discuss that with you at the final meeting. But there's never any surprises at final meetings. We discuss what's going along during the assessment, so that you know if there's issues that we're finding, or how the assessment's going. And then following the assessment, we always provide a full report. So that will detail any of the findings, if we've needed to raise any improvement actions that you might need to look at, as well as a narrative of what we've looked at, compliance with the standards, and what that looked like, and provide summaries on the organisational functionality within your organisation. Where we've raised findings, and we'll ask you to review those with us, and we will together approve an appropriate improvement action for you to take that would then resolve that issue. So there's various ways which an assessment can be delivered. And we'll decide this before we deliver the assessment itself. So it depends what's reasonable, what's required. Do we need to witness something on site? Are there parts of it that we might be able to deliver remotely, for example? So we'll discuss that with you as well. And that comes really from the recent pandemic, where we were forced literally within hours to reevaluate the whole way that we assess people. And we've now been able to be comfortable with either face-to-face assessments, remote techniques for assessments, or a blended approach where we might do some things remotely through Teams or Zoom, for example, sharing documents and things like that. But there might be things that we need to come with you, or come to your premises and actually witness being performed. So we're always open to discussion on that, and we will discuss that with you and decide and agree upon the most appropriate approach for your organisation. So now we're going to talk a little bit about those findings that I mentioned. So the hundreds of different phrases for these, whether it's improvement actions, whether it's non-conformities, whether they're mandatory and recommended. So we'll just go through these and discuss these a little bit more, just to clarify this. So a finding that the UKAS team will identify absolutely positive things as well as negatives. We're not there to catch you out. We're there to assess you as a whole. And if there are any gaps, we'll identify them with you, but we're also going to be very much identifying the strengths and the positives within your organisation. Now, if we do find something where there's a gap, we would call it a non-conformity or an improvement action. So should we need to require those, then we would record what we call a mandatory improvement action. So that means it's something that you need to do to address, to ensure that you meet the requirements of the standards. The UKAS teams allocate those into the UKAS portal then, and you can upload your evidence of how you're doing to address those in that way. And so it's an interactive process that works really well. We try to upload those and write them as we go along, but if we can't get Wi-Fi access because you're in a controlled or secure environment, then we will upload them as soon as we can, and we're able to do that. So as we said, you're required then to upload your details, have a look at the root cause of why that weakness was there, and to work out is it how wide reaching is it? What's the extent of that non-conformity? Do we need to look further, or actually is it a one-off? We'll then review those improvement actions. Can take any time up to 12 weeks if in terms of you providing us with that evidence. So if you're brand new applying for accreditation, then you get those 12 weeks to address all of the actions that may have been raised, and you upload that evidence onto the portal. We'll then review it and get back to you as soon as we can, within 4 weeks of you submitting that information, and let you know whether that finding has been cleared or whether we require some further clarification, for example. The assessment is conducted, and then there is a requirement that there is an independent decision maker, and that person then might be one person, it might be a group of people, and they're in place to review the report and confirm whether recommendation in the report is appropriate, whether the grant of accreditation can be awarded. And this process is split into 2 phases. So the first is a provisional decision, and the second, when that has been completed and all the findings have been cleared, is followed by the final decision. So this is as much about making sure that we followed our processes and we've documented our reports fully, so that it can be independently reviewed and verified, to make sure that our processes have been met, as well as the assessment itself. So as we said, it's independent, extremely important that it remains independent. So we literally go with looking at the reports that have been produced and the records that sit behind them within our systems, to look at how we've planned your assessment, how we've conducted it, who conducted it, and the outcomes of that assessment as well. So that provisional assessment, the first stage, is typically completed once the assessments are complete, but there may well be non-conformities that are still to be addressed. So we carry on doing this while you're looking at your improvement action, so that we can make the system as agile and slick, I was going to say, but you know what I mean, as possibly that we can. The second stage, that final decision stage, is completed once all of the assessments have been completed and all of those non-conformities, all those findings have been corrected, and that we've accepted them. The output of the decision-making process also includes checking that the schedule is correct. It gets published. We also publish the certificates and make sure that they're sent to you, including a set of accreditation symbols for you to use on your documentation on your website, in line with requirements for that. So that's the good day, the day that we all really look forward to, and we celebrate with you on that great day when your accreditation is granted. Accredited organisations can usually display their accreditation through use of UKAS symbols relevant to their accredited activities, as we said. UKAS is licensed by the Department of Business and Trade to use and confer these national accreditation symbols. They're not ours. We are licensed to use them as well, and that's because it contains the crown. So it's a very important symbol that we need to ensure is used correctly. Now, of course, we encourage you, after all of the work that you've done, to use your accreditation symbols for any promotional purposes that you want to, provided the conditions of the accreditation logos and symbols are met. And these can be found on our UKAS website. And if you trade overseas, you because of our multilateral agreement, you can also use the ILAC or the IAF mark to signal that global acceptance that we discussed earlier. So this slide shows some examples of the rules which govern the accepted use of symbols. So for example, you can see you can use them exhibition stands, you can use them absolutely on your certificates or reports, website, as long as it's not misleading and it's in line with an accredited activity. However, you're not permitted, and we're not permitted to use them on vehicles, on a building or on a flag, or on goods or products themselves and primary packaging. All that is laid out in that document outlining the conditions for use. So promoting your accreditation, the good stuff, promotional brochures are very much used throughout UKAS, and we've produced a variety of materials to promote the benefit of using accredited services, such as those that you may provide. They can be downloaded, distributed, hyperlinked. They can support quotations or direct marketing, and all of these can be accessed from the UKAS website. We've got a set of promotional videos that promote accreditations, and these are all hosted on our UKAS YouTube channel. So again, these can be linked or embedded within your own website. You can subscribe to the channel to receive alerts if we add, or as and when we add new videos to it. So World Accreditation Day has just gone past, so that's held annually on the 9th of June. The event is organised by ILAC and IAF, and is promoted by the standards, metrology and conformity assessment community. So if you're members on LinkedIn, you'll have seen lots about World Accreditation Day from all of us as we've been celebrating that in the last few weeks. So you're encouraged to use the materials produced for this Awareness Day to promote your accredited status to your customers, to your stakeholders, to whomever you would like to. And the theme and materials are published on the UKAS website and social media channels near to the date, so you'll have seen those as we've mentioned. So now we're going to move on to what happens after you've been granted accreditation, and it all becomes normal then. So we're going to talk about how you manage your certification, your accreditation, including the surveillance steps and the reassessment steps that also then happen as well. So if you were on the initial webinar last week, you'll have seen this infogram. So I'll just go through it again for those who weren't there. So we start off on the left-hand side with the application process. So we need your forms to be completed. We need to process the application and prepare for assessments. We make sure that we've got the right assessment approach, the right team, the right number of days or processes that we're going to use to assess you. If it's applicable and if you've requested one as well, we highly recommend it, as I know I keep saying, then we can move on to the pre-assessment phase. And then following that comes the formal initial assessment that starts with that opening meeting, where we interview members of your staff, we look at records, we do witnessing, we do that vertical or horizontal assessments. We report it in full, in line, as well as any improvement actions. And we always have that final meeting to give you a debrief and explain next steps. Then we move on to that decision-making process, that independent decision, where we are then able to grant or renew your accreditation or extend your accreditation if you're extending your scope. And then we move into that last box on the right-hand side, which is a 4-year cycle. So we have year 1s, 2 and 3s where we perform a surveillance, and then in year 4 we'll perform what we call a reassessment, and that's so that we can renew your accreditation. So your accreditation will be confirmed on an annual basis through the surveillance activity, with that full reassessment on the 4th year, as I've said, The first surveillance itself takes place 6 months after the grant of accreditation. That's because we know that there's such a lot going on to get granted and develop those systems and policies and processes that when they start to embed, quite often they need to be tweaked or changed. So we'll come and see you after 6 months to see how things are embedding and if you've needed to change anything and how you're getting on. Thereafter, we'll come and see you annually. So the 4-year cycle consists of 3 annual surveillance periods of assessment activities conducted in year 1 at 6 months, and then 12 months later at year 2, and 12 months later at year 3, and then 1 reassessment activity in year 4. And that allows us then to move on to a new 4-year cycle, which is then annually as well. At the initial assessment phase, you'll be provided with an estimate of the work provided and required in the 4-year cycle. And then if you change your scope, either reduce it or extend it, then we'll also look at that effort to see if it needs to be amended at all. Costs. All assessment fees are effort related. So we have a daily charge, a daily fee that we charge, and then so if we're with you for half a day, we would charge you half of a daily fee. If we're with you for 2 days, we'll charge you 2 of those. The costs are hugely dependent, on the complexity of the scope of accreditation which you're seeking. The fees include not just the time that the assessment fees teams are with you, but also our office time, our reporting time as well. And a list of our current fees could be found on our website, included in our standard terms of business. And now we're going to just move on to some indication of costs. But as we've said, it's typically because everyone will be different. So the cost for accreditation is related to your scope. So typically, the larger or more complicated that scope, or the more assessment time is required, the larger the cost will be. So if we need 3 assessors for 3 days or 2 assessors for 2 days, you'll see how that cost can vary very significantly, even by just those subtle changes there. Okay, moving on. So we've got some costs here for you, just as a feel for, starter for 10. So we've got a soil analysis laboratory, pre-assessment, we're looking at there between 3.5 and 5.5 days. Initial assessment up to 7.5 up to 11 days. Then there's an annual surveillance, which is obviously much less than the initial assessment. And that reassessment cost as well. Those costs are all listed exclusive of VAT, and there's far more information on breakdowns for specific types of a laboratory, of certification body, of inspection body, validation verification bodies, etc. on our website. So do have a look at those for much more information that we can give you. So if you're interested in proceeding with accreditation, the first thing that you need to do is to contact us. Let us know you're out there, what you're looking for, and what we can do to help you. And this slide shows the various departments for each type of inquiry. However, any contact at UKAS will be able to put you through to the right people. So you can contact anyone and we'll get to us eventually. So we've got general accreditation or technical inquiry information there, the sales team for applications, and the academy for if you'd like to inquire about UKAS training course. And of course, there's always a lot of information on our website for you to look at as well. Okay, so question time. Laura, have we got any questions?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Okay, thought we might.
Okay, so we've had one that's come in that says, if the laboratory is an internal testing lab for a food manufacturing company, is the legal entity of the said company enough, or does the lab need to be a separate one?
As long as you're within that company, then it's absolutely fine. And we do accredit a number of different organisations exactly that way. So if you're an internal laboratory and you're part of that legal entity, then that's absolutely fine. We can accredit you in that way. Yeah, and we do. That's fine.
Thank you. Someone also asked, are non-conformities categorized? So, and they've given the examples of major or minor. And what is the difference between a major or a minor?
Yeah, so we used to, many years ago, we used to call them majors and minors. We don't do that now because they all need to be addressed. Some of them, you know, are whoppers perhaps, and some of them are very small things that just need looking at. But no, we don't classify them. The only differentiation we make is to say this is a mandatory action. So this is something that you need to do in order to comply with the standard. And then the other classification we've got is recommended. So it may not be that there's a problem with compliance with the standard itself, but it might be, do you know what, you could simplify the way you're doing this, or it might be an idea to think about that, but it's something just to recommend to you, and we would discuss it at another assessment, but you do not have to act on it if your organisation doesn't wish to. So that's the only two classifications that we have. We don't go major, minor.
Thank you. Interesting question. Can the CAB that's being assessed, the conformity assessment body that's undergoing assessment, can they refuse an assessor that's been selected by UKAS to conduct this assessment?
You can certainly let us know, absolutely. Quite often, we part of our process in managing our technical assessors and our staff is that any conflicts of interest need to be declared. So we look at that regularly. So it may well be that it's somebody who's worked for you or perhaps worked for a competitor or whatever that reason is, perfectly justifiable, then we would ask you to let us know. The problem we possibly might have is if that's the only assessor that we've got in a particular very niche area, then we may need to discuss that with you. But that's quite rare. But that's the only kind of caveat I would give to that answer is yes, generally, but it may be cases where we've got little alternatives. So we would discuss that with you, and we could always have somebody accompany that assessor or think of a different approach if we need to. But yes, absolutely, we would ask you, this is a team that we're looking to bring. Are you happy with that? So if you've got any concerns, and that's when we're planning the assessment, and we would absolutely ask that question.
Thank you. And then we've got another question here, and this is how does the laboratory evolve to a flexible scope?
Oh, my favourite thing ever, flexible scopes. So, a flexible scope is a big thing to be accredited for. It allows you as the laboratory in this case to say we're accredited, let's say to to analyse food for pesticides. As we all know with pesticides, there are hundreds and hundreds of them, and new ones are being identified or managed and under requirements all the time. So if you have a fixed scope of accreditation that lists, I know, 200 pesticides, next week another one might come out, and the week after another one might be needing to be added. So a flexible scope enables you as a laboratory to address that in the way that we assess then your processes for management, for your validation, for your competence and expertise in a certain area, and within very tight boundaries. So it may well be a particular type of food or a particular type of analysis that's being carried on. So for pesticides here, but not for allergens, for example, we would make sure it's very, very much ring fenced. Then we would allow you to make those decisions, and then we would assess you annually on what that looks like. The risk there being that if you get it wrong and we come and see you, you would then need to recall those accredited certificates demonstrating where that flexible scope had been used. We tend to see it's not being applied for first off because it's such a specialist thing to be to be granted accreditation for. And we tend to get to need to know you well before you move on to the flexible scope. However, there are no firm rules about that. If you can demonstrate competence to manage a flexible scope and implement it, then we will discuss that with you and see how you assess it. But generally, it comes from people who have been doing that process for a while, and we have that understanding and that trust and confidence with them that they have lots of, say, extensions coming through. We very rarely record any findings. They've got it down off pat. We just come and sort of nod it through. It gives them that opportunity to do it in a quicker way than coming through the formal extension scope process. So it all depends on who you are, where you are, what you're doing, and talking to us about it for that.
Thank you. And that's all the questions that we've got today. But I would just like to say, obviously, thank you to everyone for joining us, and thank you, Louise, for giving us a really good overview of what's actually really quite a massive topic, I think. And like you say, there are so many depends on, and it's, you know, things that vary depending on what situation each person finds themselves in. So it's a big topic. However, if you have any questions that you think of after today, the best place to send them to is probably to communications@ukas.com, as that will come through to the marketing team, and we will be able to, anything we can't answer, which is probably most of them, we will be able to put you in touch with the right person in the business, and give you a bit more guidance of that. But yes, thanks once again for joining us, and I will let everyone get on with their day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely weekend.
You too, Louise. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.